This is the story of my stepfather, Jon Miles, a Vietnam vet and well-known community activist in Tucson, Arizona, who has fought for the rights of the downtrodden his entire life, even as he battles cancer. His activism could be traced back to his experiences in the Vietnam War, when he was drafted into an artillery unit from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. After Vietnam, his labor organizing led to representing blue-collar workers in the mining industry. It led to meeting Cesar Chavez, the leader of the Farm Workers Union, and it even led to being investigated by the FBI. I am Ramon Bannister. My intent here is to document what made my stepfather into the type of man he is today. But in many ways, this is a journey into my own life and discovering who I am. Previously on the Jon Miles Series.
So I took freshman composition. One of the tests was, they give you photos and you're supposed to write an essay. I figured, well, I'm going to write this. I'm going to write that, he received some award for bravery. And then I started going into the whole rant, basically. And all of a sudden I realized, I'm against this damn war. I've been against it, all this crap that I've seen going on. And the TA was so excited about it when she saw that. And she invited me to go to an anti-war rally. Then they found out, I was a Vietnam veteran. So right away, and I was kind of put on the spot. Some people didn't like that fact. But then, so basically I just told some of the things I told you about how we were destroying people's lives over there, and they weren't people that were shooting at us. They were people that lived there, and things like that. And I just told, how it just took me a while to see the light, and I'm here, I'm going to be part of you, I'm part of it all. And so I became like some kind of a spokesperson in a way too. So I participated, the first march I participated in was going from in front of Old Main, east of Old Main. There was nothing but a huge field. There was that big cactus garden was there, but this huge field. So we gathered in that huge field, and then we marched down Campbell all the way to 22nd Street, and across the railroad tracks all the way out to Davis-Monthan, and then all the way to Davis-Monthan, where we had a big rally out there. And there had thousands and thousands of people. The only thing I didn't participate in was some of the riots and stuff that were going on. There were some rallies at nighttime on the campus where there were fires going on, tires are burning, all hell was breaking loose, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for anybody shooting at me, like the cops or anybody like that either, So that was one of my reasons. And a friend of mine who worked at the mines lived nearby there, and I was sitting with him on his front porch. He lived on Euclid and 5th Street, right, not Euclid, Tyndall and 5th Street. And that's before Tyndall was a through, or Euclid was a through street. The through street at that time was First Avenue. Tyndall was Euclid was just a regular street, and then Tyndall, he and his wife and kids lived in one of those little apartment houses. It's a 2 duplex kind of a thing. So we were there just watching all this activity going on, then reading about it all in the newspaper the next day, and so on. So then I went to work at another mine up at San Manuel, and then I became active in the union up there, And I joined the union down at Anaconda, where I worked as a heavy equipment operator. But then when I went to school, I left Anaconda. And then I went one semester to school, and I figured, that summer I went up to, that summer also I went to summer school. Because what happened, I had some friends, we were going to hike, that summer of 1970, we were going to go hike the John Muir Trail in California. And his brother was in the Air Force, and in Las Vegas, and we were going to meet him up there and then go up to in California and hike. Well, as it turned out, the last day of classes, I was on the ball team, a softball team, and I got my ankle broken. I was a first baseman, and some guy chicken shit, you know, it was kind of like a busted play to begin with, and I was going to, it was a ball hit ground ball between first and second. I was going to go get it, and the second baseman, I got it. So I went back to the bag and put my foot on the side of the bag, and this guy that came running up, he didn't step on the bag, he stepped on my leg, you know. So it fractured both bones in my leg. So there went my hiking trip, you know. So that healed. You know, it took by July it healed, and it wasn't like a bad fracture. And then I'll never forget, I went with some other friends, went up to Lake Roosevelt, and I just had them drop me off in the middle of the lake, and I kind of swam or worked my way back to shore, you know, to give my leg exercise. I mean, they were riding around keeping an eye on me, not that I was doing anything stupid. So then it got better, and then I went to figure I was planning on working, so then I figured, well, I'm going to go to Magma Copper Company. The pay is better up there, so I went up there, and I got really active in the union up there because it was, and meanwhile there were more Vietnam veterans coming back and getting into the workforce, so I had more of a bind with some of these guys, you know. And so then the union was really great. That was really the turning point, you know, by progressiveness, because the union was, I mean, the company, they were bastards, you know. So I became a grievance man. I really studied our contract, and I got pretty good at arguing with the bosses and even the general managers hearing, where I just went up through the ranks. And so I worked at that, and then in the summertime, the company would let you take off and go to school, and you could work there in the summer. So after I worked there that fall and then springs. No, what I did, I worked the fall semester because I couldn't work in the summer, and then in the springtime I decided to. I said I got to get everything straight. I went to school the fall semester, and then in the springtime I decided to work. I mean, I had GI Bill money, I had money, but I just wanted to work to make some more money. So I did that, and then I even worked the summer. Then the next fall I could work again, and they basically set it up, if I wanted to, I could go full-time to school, but just work in the summertime, you know, come up there and work for 2 months in the summer. But what happened in '74, in June of '74, I was on the negotiating committee for the union, negotiating against the company for a contract. And I was just back from like being off for 4 or 5 days on negotiations, and our union guys had a walkout, a wildcat strike. So, and I was kind of a leader in the smelter. So when they heard I was there, so I went out there and I said, you guys, what's going on? So I said, there's a lot better reasons to walk out than the reasons we went out, but what am I going to do? We took a vote, you know, and we voted to come up with a list of demands for the company. And so finally the company came out, and I was a spokesperson, and I read all the list of demands, and the company said, that's not acceptable. If you come back to work, there will be some disciplinary action, but if you don't come back to work, you know, you're going to lose your jobs. So we figured, well, hell, we're not going back, you know. So then meanwhile, the strike just mushroomed to where by the time midnight got around, we had the whole operation, 4,200 workers, was shut down. That was the mine, the mill, the smelter, the refinery. Everything was completely shut down. So needless to say, like the 73 of us that started this whole thing, there was no way we were ever going to get our jobs back, you know. So, you know, some guys did. We went to arbitration and all that, but I never got my job back. But during that, before the Wildcat strike, the Farm Workers Union was organizing in Arizona. And there was a recall movement against Jack Williams, who was the governor, a real pig, you know. So we wanted to get this guy, Gary Pollock, in as governor. So they had marched all through the mining communities, so I marched with them, and they had a boycott, Safeway boycott, so I participated in Tucson at the boycott, so I got to meet a lot of farm worker people. So then after I got fired, I figured, well, heck, I got to do something. So I volunteered and worked with the farm workers. What I did, it was summertime, and I signed up for classes at Pima College. They had all these satellite campuses, so I took 12 units, which so would qualify me for full GI benefits, so I could afford to live without working, because I was living at the farm worker boycott house, rent free. But that meant I had to go out on boycotts and what have you, and there were a lot of resistance too. So I was kind of in charge of security and peacekeeping on it. And like locally, we'd get some of these people, they'd want to cause problems, like the Teamsters Union was our arch enemies at that time. So word got around about it, so they called me over in California to go over to the headquarters over there to be taught peacekeeping and security. So I got taught by Cesar Chavez's top guys about crowd control, about events, and then I participated. I didn't want to live in California either. I like to go fishing and do stuff here. They pretty much kept you bound up over there. And I said, look, I'll work here in Arizona. Whenever Chavez comes to Arizona, I'll be able to go to Phoenix, Yuma, wherever he's at, and help on all the logistics and all that stuff, and any marches that might happen.
This is 74, 75?
Well, this started like, probably 775, thereabouts. Late 74, 75, but this went on, so so I was doing that, and that went on so I got to meet Cesar Chavez and ride with him in the car and to know him as a person, So it was really a good experience. I got to meet first time in my life, I met some labor thugs, guys that carried guns, and some guys that were contrary to the farm workers. They were kind of wanted to help us out, and Chavez had to run them off,
To backtrack, can you tell us about when you were hit by shrapnel or when you were shot?
Yeah, it was. I was in the tent. I wasn't on guard duty, and you can tell when you hear the mortars coming over, they whistle, and you can tell where if they're gonna go beyond or short. And they were coming over. They're getting pretty close. So I was there like in my underwear, and I put on a flak jacket, got my helmet and rifle, and headed to the bunker. Which everybody was assigned different bunkers, headed out there, and when I was on the way out there, I could hear this whistling. Holy smokes, this is going to be close. So I just dove down on the ground, and boom, it went off, Man, my ears were ringing. I was almost deaf, and then I got up to run, and all of a sudden, what the hell's going on here, man? God, and I reached around my back, to my left hand, and what the hell, and I was bleeding, man, with blood coming down my back. So I got to the bunker, and by the time I got to the bunker, it was stiffening up. I could hardly even walk, So I got in, and my buddies got me there, and they got me, and big piece of shrapnel had penetrated my flak jacket. Just think if I didn't have a flak jacket on. It came when they had to take me to a field hospital, and it was a half-inch from my spine. So they went in, so when my buddies, they got my flak jacket off, and the piece of metal came out. Now I wish that they had saved it. They took it out, and then they just bundled up my T-shirt and made a ball to stop the bleeding. Then they came in, and they got me over to a field tent right on our fire base area, and they x-rayed, and there was no other shrapnel. They just sewed it up with like 7 stitches and put me on light duty. Said, well, you can't get home, with this wound, So, so I went back there, and the only way I could sleep, and I got like bed rest, and was on my back. Because because you know what happens, it gets tore muscle. Fortunately, it didn't hit bone, didn't hit my spine. I still have, I mean, I can't see, but I had a scar there about so much, and I don't know, of course now I have all these scars from the operation, the lung surgery, But so yeah, so that laid me up for a while, and I didn't even go back to that field hospital to get the stitches taken. I just had a buddy of mine get a nail clipper and take all the stitches out. But that story with Chavez was on. I was on security, went to Phoenix, the old Adams Hotel in Phoenix, and that was, I was basically on security, and I was just heck like a cowboy almost. I had Levi or Wrangler pants on, a Levi jacket, and I even had a cowboy hat, and things like, because you had to stand out in a way so other people on security knew who you were. So I was in this hotel. They had these big tables with all these, white tablecloths and dishes and all these big donors. These big rich people were there. So I was basically in the room, kind of off in the background as basically security, because we were at basic war with the Teamsters, and there'd been threats on Chavez's life. But anyway, when it came time for the seating arrangements, I wasn't really planning on eating. I would probably eat later. So the next thing I know, this guy, Ibarra, I forget his first name, but I always wanted to call him Richard, but it wasn't Richard, but it was Michael Ibarra. He was head of, and I could be wrong, so usually I remember things, but for some reason because I know so many Ibarra families. But anyway, he told me, he called me, "Hey Miles, come here." So I went over, he says, you're gonna eat at this table. I said, "Well, that's Chavez's table." "Yeah, you're gonna be here." And what Chavez did, he didn't want all these stuffed shirts sitting there at his table when he's eating. He got some kitchen help. He got some waitresses. He wanted working people there. And Ibarra thought I looked like a working people. Of course, I had to do away with my hat, So hell, I was sitting, there was like these tables, I don't know if there were 10 people at these big tables, round tables. So I got to sit at the same table and have dinner, nice fine meal, And some person next to me didn't want to eat all their food. Well, hell, I ate anything I could eat, But that was kind of a highlight, So, but that was.
Do you remember when?
No, it would have been in the late 70s, So, because then like in the 80s is when I met your mom, so that restricted a lot of I met you guys. That restricted a lot of my movement, so to speak, as far as being, footloose and fancy free. So this was a time when I could do stuff like that. So it had to be before 79. So anyway, so that was but that made an impression on me in a way that, that he wanted to have this image. He was a leader of working type people, not these rich bankers and people who got money that donate. They needed the donations, of course, and the religion. He had a priest there too. Some guy with his collar was at our table too, but just some working priest that he knew. So that was interesting. So really, but meanwhile, during all this time is going on, I'm learning so much. I met John Miles, who had a real big influence on me politically. He was a Marxist, and he wasn't a member of the Communist Party, but he was a Marxist, and he was working out at the mines and was very active in the union and was really outspoken. I'd go to the union meetings, and I said, I got to know this guy, and I didn't make any move to know him, but then I was pretty active. He worked in the mill, I worked in the smelter. So I had a lot of guys that would come to union meetings with me. And when we had some demands, and Makoviak saw that, I could organize an army. So he got together with me and we formed a rank and file movement. We put out a monthly newsletter about what's going on in the mines. We'd have meetings. And the smelter when I started working in the smelter, we had it was like 20% union membership. And we had I think there were 480 people on at that time, 3 shifts, at the smelter. So by the time, years later, and I wasn't working continuous either, but whenever I came back, I still retained my seniority, I still retained my position with the union because I paid my dues all the time. But what happened, by that time when we got fired in 74, that we had over 80% union membership at the smelter. And the union membership had gone, because we had 4,200 members, but a lot of we had a unity council. We had 7 different unions, but the Steelworkers Union, which I was in, was the biggest union. And we started out, we had maybe 1,400 members in the union. Well, when I left there, we had 2,200 members in the union, and growing. Of course, when we got fired and the rank and file movement went to pieces, so did the activity, because I was pretty famous for a grievance person. Hell, I'd go in there, the bosses were just regular guys. They're foremans. So I would intimidate them. I'd go in there in the morning, I carried a briefcase. I had all my grievance forms, I had my contract, I had safety regulations, I had all this stuff in there. And the job I had was I'd have to be on the company property for 8.5 hours a day, so I got a half hour off for lunch. So the lunch room that I had lunch in was in where the labor pool was, where the labor people came and the new people. So I had a guy, Mark Tovar, that he was my main lieutenant. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was in a tank, armor. He was in the tank. I call him a tanker, and he was big like a tank too. But so we'd talk union. I'd do all this union business during the lunch hour, lunch half hour, because it was our time, and the bosses tried to stop it. Tell them, no, this is our time. We don't get paid for it. We can do whatever the hell we want. And I had to file a grievance to make sure that was, so they would back off. So we would do that. If the boss would come out, there was always a whistle that would blow when lunch started, the big smelter wide. And then when it was over, so we would go, and sometime the foremen would come out to want to do assignments before the lunch whistle blew when lunch was over. So I'd run them back into their office, because the whistle hasn't blown yet, So the new people really bought into stuff like this, and then they could see that I'm having meetings with people that have grievances, and we're writing this stuff up, because I would write them up and sign it, and then this was the second stage of the grievance, sign it, and they would sign it, and then I'd turn them into the bosses, and then later in the day, or they'd have 5 days to answer. Either they accepted my grievance or they fought it, and they would go to another step. We'd have to go before the superintendent and go down there and argue the situation. So I had another guy named Joe Brewer who was real good, and he was more Hellraiser, but he wasn't as organized as I was, but he knew the whole grievance procedure inside and out, and we worked together on that, and he helped me a lot. I helped him too, but I learned a lot from him and became very effective. And it was kind of like John Makoviak and I would talk later on that the biggest mistake we made, and it was Isabel's dad, Rudy Garcia, Isabel Garcia's dad would tell me, John, you guys are fighting 2 fronts at once. You should just be fighting the company, because we were fighting the union too, the union hierarchy. They had the good old boy in there, and they were running things the way they liked it, and we wanted to get grassroots participation. So we were challenging, heck, we got elected to union offices and things like that, and we're changing the way things operated. So Rudy was saying, you back off and just focus on the company, which we realized after the fact that that's what we should have done. Rudy was right. So, but John says, we made a big mistake, because we really had a political movement going. But John, he fell into it too, just like I did, And you talk about press. My parents were living in Wilcox, and I mean, they were finding all about what I was doing on the news, you know. I'd be up there standing in the back of a pickup truck with a microphone.
And how did your parents react to that?
Oh, they supported me on that, yeah. Yeah, because it wasn't like I was raising my gun and going shoot anything. But my parents kind of expected that of me too, because I was always that type of a character, so to speak, whereas my twin brother was just the opposite, you know, and he's the one that wound up going to prison, and I never went to prison, you know. That's another story. I mean, if we go on different stories, there were things that happened even before Vietnam, all these interesting things that happened that I did. I think I may have told one about the guard duty thing too, but I had other things that happened at Fortsville that I did that were worth repeating, you know, over the years. I've told the stories that were just how I came so close to getting in all kinds of trouble by my big mouth, you know. You know, I've mellowed over the years now. Well, it wasn't a mining unit. I worked for Anaconda Copper Company. At an open pit mine, they were developing a mine. So we had to strip all the overburden, all the soil off the top of the ore, the rock. So I worked at that mine. I learned a pretty good skill as far as operating this equipment. I even got a card about what equipment I was qualified to operate on or operate with, and some of it was a pretty impressive equipment. I was pretty proud of myself. I got pretty good at it, you know. So, but then it's a matter of just, you know, just
eventually you transitioned into the farm workers union.
well, no. So then I went to work. I figured, you know, I was making good money at Anaconda, but the way we worked was 2 weeks graveyard, 2 days. Oh no, first it was 7 on, 2 off, 7 on, 2 off, 7 on, 4 off. Then they changed it to, and it was shift work too. You work shift work, you know, days, afternoons, and nights. So then they changed it to 2 weeks day shift, 2 weeks, you know, different shifts, but you work Monday through Friday, which I didn't mind that, but I didn't like the midnight shift. I hated it. I didn't like the afternoon shift for that matter either. And I transferred from my higher paying job as heavy equipment operator, truck driver, to work on the drilling and blasting crew. We work out this is when we hit rock, or where we'd go in when they'd blow up all this stuff, and then be boulders, and we'd have to go in and drill these boulders, and then, you know, use either dynamite or these C4 explosives. We'd hook them up, and then sometimes twice a day, usually once a day, we would blast. We'd be up on the top of the pit, outside of the pit, and they'd hit the plunger, and all these rocks would break up, and our shift was over. We'd go home, but it was only blasting during the day. And I got a lot of nice rock samples walking around there, sticking these nice crystals and stuff in my pocket, you know. But I got tired of that too, and then found I could make more money working at San Manuel. Not that, you know, and I figured some guys I know had gone up there, and working at San Manuel's was 7 days on, but it was shift work again. But I just took a lower paying job to work straight days, you know, and then pretty soon we got on a 5-day a week schedule there too, but through working through the legal means with the union, working with the legislature to get some changes in the mining laws, which Joe Brewer and I were real effective on getting some major changes done, that the legislature a year later with all their cronies managed to change it, you know. But we were successful in making Magma Copper Company, instead of having 3 crews, come up with 4 crews. So they had to hire a whole number of crews. So when 3 crews, 1 crew was working every day, but if you had 4 crews, you had 1 crew that was off, and you rotated crews, and it was kind of complicated, but it worked out. The company had to hire more people, therefore they weren't forcing overtime, because the mining law said that you could not work any more than 8 hours in any 24-hour period unless it was an emergency of life or limb or something like that. I don't know if I forget how the law specified. So what they were doing when they were re-bricking some of these furnaces, they would tell guys, they'd get guys from the labor pool or wherever to work, and they were basically forcing people to work overtime. So I filed a grievance that the company was violating a state law, mining law. So we won the grievance. And the company was shocked, even we were shocked. So the company had to go and change their whole schedule there, so that, because it was a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year operation. They ran on holidays all the time. And so they had to change everything around. And the company was pissed. It's going to cost them millions of dollars. So Joe and I, we did that, and we had to go to Phoenix to the state attorneys general to get them to, back up this law that we had, and we were successful. The state attorney general wrote an opinion to the companies that made the companies do this. So it not only affected Magma Copper Company, it affected some other companies too. But the company wasn't going to just sit on their hands. What they did, they had the legislature there, and they went, and I went to one of the hearings, a Senate hearing, and I spoke at the hearing, and I was pretty good at the hearing. I embellished a lot, but because what the company wanted the law to change to where it would just be collar to collar, meaning underground. You couldn't work more than 8 hours a day underground, but all surface jobs and et cetera, could be forced to work overtime. And they were trying to say, we have clerks and people like that, and this is going to affect them, and blah, 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 and hospital workers and the town site, because everybody worked for the company. The town was a company town. So but it affected everybody. So when I went before this, when they were having a hearing in Phoenix, I went and spoke about, how dangerous the smelter was. You got this heat, you got gases, you ought to see the gas masks that they give us. You got dust, you got noise. I mean, it's an awful, awful environment. I mean, you have to wear all this specialized safety equipment. I said, hell, when I went to work at the smelter, I weighed, 230 pounds, and now I weigh 200 pounds. I lost all this weight. I bullshit him, So even the senator from the area, that's San Manuel, and he worked for the company. He worked in the warehouse, and he was a local judge too. He came up to me, hey, Miles, you were really good on that, blah, blah, blah. Well, when it finally went to a vote to the Senate, he voted the company line, so they changed the law. There was still the 8-hour law, but it exempted everybody but the guys that worked underground. But meanwhile, the company had to make all these changes, so they stuck with all those changes, but then they changed it so they could still force us to work overtime too, But it was a pretty big victory, but it was only temporary. I mean, we won the battle, but the company won the war. And I had the general manager in the company when I go to general managers' hearings, and they'd be smoking. They'd have all these cigarettes, and I hated cigarette smoking. And there, he'd be at the table, and one time he got so upset at me, Mr. Miles, bang, he pounded the table, and the ashtrays are bouncing. This is the way it's been, always been at Magma Copper Company, and this is the way it's always gonna be, and blah, 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 and on like that, And what it was a grievance I had, that I was arguing that we had crews that were working 8.5 hours a day, and our lunch hour we were off. We should be allowed to go off into town to buy a hamburger or something and come back, And he was saying we weren't allowed to leave the property, and that was the grievance. I wanted to take it further, because then we had a hearing, we had an arbitration hearing, could have an arbitration hearing, which we never got, because when I was fighting that grievance, and I felt it could be won, this one we all got fired, so the grievance just faded away after that, But it was something that just looking in the laws and talking to different attorneys, labor attorneys and what have you, and people in the union too, that it was something they thought we could possibly win, because other mines, other companies like a Sarco, Kennecott, you know, they had where the straight day people could get a half hour off and go in. They'd punch in and punch out, or punch out and punch in at lunchtime, you know. So we felt we could have won it, you know, but who knows what would have happened. So, and I even got my picture put on a poster one time because I had to go out. I was a safety representative for the union at the smelter, and you know, and I had to go out once in a while. And I had to take samples from the slag pit where they dumped the slag, which was different. See what the mineral content was in the slag that was dumped. It was still hot, but not hot the way you can walk on. I'd go out there. I'd have this safety vest and cord and a cable, and they would down the hill and take different samples in bags from different areas and take them up. And one time I was chipping the slag and had the safety glasses on, and a chip came up and it shattered my safety glasses. So I came in and reported it. So the head safety guy from the company came down and took a picture. And I was a wise owl of the month. So my picture with my hard hat on and my broken, shattered glass lens was all over the company. You know, I was a wise owl of the month, wearing these safety glasses, saved his life, saved his eyesight, you know. So, you know, it's almost like, I looked at it and I said, it looks more like a wanted poster, you know. Because I said, I'm sure they would have liked to put that up there because I was a thorn in their side, you know. So I got hard-assed by my fellow safety. That was the working at Salmon Well, that rank and file movement. That was a big highlight, bigger than anything else at that time in my life, what we were doing, you know.
That was like mid-70s?
Early 70s, you know, yeah. So early to mid-70s. So that was, you know, because we had the rank and file movement. I even used some of the writing skills I had learned at the university to write articles for the newsletter, and kind of like humorous type articles. So once a month we did that. You know, we had a mimeograph machine. John or Nancy used to type the stencils, and then we would run off copies. And then once a month, John and I would go up, and some other people, we'd go to the various gates where people are going into the brass inn to get their time cards and then change clothes, change room, locker room, then hand out the newsletter, because we were allowed to do that. So it got so if we were a little bit behind one month, people are saying, when are we going to get the latest copy? Because we were tearing into the company, you know. So it was pretty effective. And I was really proud of some of the stories I wrote that were hilarious in a way too, you know. And I was very effective. You know, we had one story, the superintendent, he was one of these hardcore guys where, you know, there was in his office here, it's in a smelter office, it's away from the smelter, but he had no smoking signs, and he's one of these health nuts, and he's very religious. He was like a Southern Baptist where his kids couldn't watch TV, he didn't like swearing. And so he was a decent guy. I got along with him because I won a lot of grievances with him, and times when I didn't win, I just go to the next step, which didn't include him. It would have to go to higher ups in the company. So there was no hard feelings. But one grievance I went to, and there was a guy named Dick Westerfield. He was a general manager guy that would come down for the hearings, and this would be the second step hearings, where there'd be the foreman, the aggrieved person, me, Westerfield from the general manager's office, and then the superintendent plus the clerk. So there were all these no smoking signs coming in. I never forget, I went in, and it wasn't always Westerfield that came down, but he was kind of a chain smoker. So I went in, me and my aggrieved employee I went with, we went in there together and sat down, and here's Westerfield sitting in there smoking a cigarette, and there's an ashtray on the table. So before the meeting started, I said, "Excuse me, Dick." And he said, "Yeah, what's your problem here?" Or not that, because it wasn't. It was kind of, I was being nice. I said, can't you read that sign up there? No smoking? He said, yeah. And I said, it's a sign of disrespect to Superintendent Sloan here. Obviously that no smoking sign is there for a reason. Couldn't you cease from smoking while we have this hearing? I said, I'm offended by you smoking here. So he put the cigarette out, and we went on with the meeting. So, and I don't remember, because the story I thought was so cool. I don't even remember on the grievance if I won or lost the grievance. But afterwards, Sloan said, hey, Miles, I want to talk to you. So I went there, and I didn't know how he was going to respond to my grievance. He didn't say anything when I went after Dick Westerfield, but he thanked me for saying that. And he says, I couldn't say that. He said, but you could, And I said, well, do you have problems with some of these other people coming down? He said, yeah, because they all smoke. And I said, well, maybe I ought to come down here for every meeting. I said, maybe Westerfield will go back and tell those other guys what happened. Or maybe he'll chew your ass out later too, So I don't know whatever happened. I never really noticed anybody smoking after that, So I felt that was another feather in my cap, so to speak, I was doing yard work, landscape yard work, and I dealt with a lot of the planting and stuff I did with a nursery. They were actually good friends of mine, were running the nurseries, and then they went out in nursery business on their own. So I was getting jobs through them. So, and I was volunteering with the farm workers, so it wasn't like I was getting paid, but we had a crew here. We had a volunteer boycott house, and we picketed usually on weekends at liquor stores and grocery stores. So, and then whenever Chavez was in town, we provided security for him. But then I was working. Then I got a real good job. I got a job as a sorority house doing all their maintenance. It was really a good paying job too. And so I got that. It was a big job. It was the first of my jobs. So they started getting me jobs at these small apartment complexes and things like that. But it was jobs for me. They weren't getting any money out of it. It was my jobs. So I was doing less and less with the farm workers. And then I think then I was friends. There was a Communist Party was pretty active around there too. So they had some parties going on. And also there was the Tucson Committee for Human Rights in Latin America. They had some parties going on, and the Communist Party was involved with them, as was the Socialist Workers Party and non-affiliated party people. So I went to, that's when I met your mom. She went to one of these things. She was part of the group Buiatoli, or a group that was singing at some of our events to raise money and what have you. So then I started dating her, and I didn't even know she had 2 kids. I remember Jen was always, or no, you were the one that was always sneaking around the corner, and I'd go over to visit, and I didn't even know she had a daughter at the time, because Jen evidently was a big sleeper. I think Juan, your uncle Tio Juan, was living there too. So we'd go out, and then she got me more involved with. She had moved to Tucson here, and she got me. I was more involved with the Tucson Committee for Human Rights in Latin America, but I was working too. And I still, at that time, I had my own apartment I was living at too, because I had a girlfriend I lived with for a year and a half or 2 that I lived with until she moved back to California, and she was from the farm workers in '78. So I was living at my place. I had my place and then the boycott house too.
So who asked who out?
Well, I think your mom was friends with Pat Bell, who was was a district organizer for the Communist Party. So Pat kind of like arranged different events that we'd be out. So I don't remember who asked who out, but it was kind of, we were at a lot of these social events together. And, one thing leads to another. So then, I was and then I knew a lot of the Chileans and what have you. And then your mom, then I realized your mom had a daughter ttoo. I didn't know Regine was around. So then John Bannister, he was still around. He was living in Phoenix, so got to know him. He'd come down and take you guys to church or something on Sunday. But then I did things with you guys, and we'd go hiking or stuff like that, just different things. So then finally your mom kind of talked me into marrying her, which I could care less. I said we could live together. We lived it. So I moved in with her at the Menlo Park Apartments there. We were just living together, so all of us were living together, So we decided to go to Chile, so we gave up the Menlo Park Apartments and we went to Chile for a couple of months, then came back. So we rented a house on Shannon Road, the first Shannon home house. But then I had to continue working and then still doing the Tucson Committee for Human Rights stuff, getting really immersed in that. There was anti-war activity going on earlier, but that kind of wound down as the war ended. The war, basically, they started pulling troops out in '69, but it really wasn't over until early '73 or '74. But the South Vietnamese had pretty much taken over running the army. So I was working with the Tucson Committee, and then a group formed, I think, in '87 called Veterans for Peace. So being everybody knew I was a veteran, so I joined the Veterans for Peace and became pretty active with them as a spokesperson. We go to schools and talk to schools, and we'd have events, show events, have speaking things. So it was just a combination of Veterans for Peace and the Tucson Committee for Latin America was involved in a lot of activities. Then there was the fight and the battles going on in El Salvador, so we were there. We were against U.S. intervention. Then there was Nicaragua, Guatemala. So everything mushroomed off of that. And I got some Guatemalan stories. I should probably tell you. It's kind of, because I did stuff later on in the late 80s. That was, if I had ever got caught, particularly in Mexico, I would probably still be in jail, But anyway, so I was very active in that way, to the point where with the Tucson Committee for Human Rights, I should call it CHURLA. It's a lot easier to say than spit out the whole thing. CHURLA is the acronym. That the things we did, we really drew the attention from the Ronald Reagan administration, to the point where they investigated us. Did an FBI harassment and stuff like that. So I was kind of proud of the fact that meant we're being effective. In our opinion, we weren't doing anything against the law. What the heck are they investigating us for? So we refused to participate in their investigation.
Jon described his war stories while sometimes smiling and laughing. That apparent contradiction between what we hear and what we see on his face may, to put a little bit of psychoanalysis in this, may suggest severe trauma. Perhaps his way of dealing with that trauma was to become a social activist in his community, in this case, Tucson, Arizona. As we'll see in the next episode, Jon would find other causes in which to invest his energy.